Ezra Miller flashed me again, and I have thoughts. This is Matt with State of Flex here with my spoiler-filled review for The Flash. So, if you do not want any Flash spoilers, this is the time to hop off the video. I have a non-spoiler video that I will have linked in the description box down below. And while we're talking about the description box down below, I would also like to talk to you about something that one of my friends is doing. One of my friends developed a publishing company called Wandering Witch. Wandering Witch is a space for growth where imaginative thinkers come together to challenge perspectives, engaging with counterculture through magical realism and real magicalism. This is a publishing company that looks to publish poetry, short stories, novels. It's an alternative source with which to get your works published, or if you like to consume books, this is a small independent publishing company to do that. In the description below, you'll be able to find a link to their website as well as their GoFundMe page to get this upstart company up and started. But moving on to The Flash. As I said in my non-spoiler review, this is a movie that I liked, but I feel like this is going to be an incredibly divisive film. As divisive even as something like The Last Jedi was. There's a lot of good in it and a lot of bad, and I think that arguments could be made that this is really a great DCEU outing, and arguments could be made that this is really one of the worst DCEU outings. And so here's my sort of general thoughts on that. First of all, the tone. The tone worked for me. This almost feels like a sequel to Justice League, but the theatrical cut of Justice League. The tone is very similar to that. So if you didn't like the tone of that version of Justice League, you're probably not going to be too on board with this one. There's a lightness and a levity to it, a goofiness and a silliness, but it works because Barry Allen is a character that can maintain that. Trying to force those principles on, say, Batman or Aquaman, some of the other characters, Wonder Woman, it didn't really gel entirely well with Justice League, especially since we'd been so indoctrinated with how they behaved in the two prior Snyder films. So here it works a little better. That said, even from the offing, the tone was just kind of jarring. The opening scene of this movie has Flash kind of waiting impatiently in line, being like a snarky kid that really wants to eat his food, and then having to deal with somebody who is very slow at their job. And then he gets a call from Batman and has to race off. And as he does so, he gets to a giant catastrophe that has happened. While Batman is solving the crimes, Barry is left to do cleanup. Now, I like that idea. I like the idea of him being the one to stay back and save people. As something that he learned in the theatrical cut of Justice League, it makes sense. Batman taught him to save one. That whole scene, that's one of the things that's unique to the theatrical cut of Justice League that I really liked. He learns to save one, and then he learns to save many in Justice League. And in this, he continues that trend. He is there to help save those that Batman doesn't have time for because he's trying to stop the criminals in action. So that worked for me really well, until it got kind of weird. This thing takes place at a hospital, and Barry has to save a bunch of children. And Hard-Boiled, this film is not. Hard-Boiled, if you haven't seen it, is a John Woo movie from the mid-90s that's fantastic and ends with a huge hospital scene where Chow Yun-Fat has to save small children. And so babies are beginning to fall out of the sky, and we have a weird recreation of the scene from the Snyder Cut where Barry is running in super slow-mo to save Iris West, but pausing to eat a hot dog and stuff a wiener in his pocket. And that was one of the worst things in the Snyder Cut. I could not stand that scene. And they do that in this film while also having babies in peril. And so depending on how you respond to that, you might hop off right away. I watched this movie with my wife, and she does not like watching children in peril, so I was afraid she was just going to be like, nope, and then get up and head out. She didn't, though. However, she did find that the most white-knuckle moment of the entire movie. But yeah, you have babies in peril, you have sharp objects like heading straight to their throat or their eyes, and Andy Muschietti is the director of this film. He previously had done the It movies, and he really goes there, brings that It energy to this film in that scene. And like, on paper, it kind of works, and in motion, in a bubble, I kind of like that scene, but it also, there's too much stopping and snacking for me, and I get it, that's part of, like, Flash's game, is that he's constantly snacking, but it was too much, just too much. I would have been fine with him just saving the children. Him pausing and snacking and shoving a baby in a microwave, I don't know. It didn't land for me. Let me know if it landed for you. I'm really curious to see how people respond to that scene. That's one of the scenes that I think will, if you're predisposed to not like this movie, that's the scene that's going to initiate the rest of your tone for the rest of the film. Yeah. But it partially worked for me as the movie as a whole kind of did. Moving on, you have Barry venting his frustrations that he is just the Justice League's janitor. He's the cleanup man. And it makes sense that, Batman would have relied on him to do that, as he taught him in the theatrical cut to be there to save others, but it also would weigh heavily on Barry in the same way that Peter Parker and Iron Man had that relationship, where Peter Parker wanted to prove himself, knowing himself capable of being an Avenger, but Tony just wanting to protect the kid as much as he could. You get that same energy reflected in this film. However, for me, it worked really well. The only problem with that in this film is that you never really got a sense of that in any of the other movies besides Justice League. And granted, there's chronologically only taking place afterwards are the two Shazams and Aquaman, and I guess Suicide Squad. But it worked, but it rung a touch hollow because we just didn't see much of that. You'll see a lot of that in the film. But the opening action battle with Batman and all the stuff Batman's doing is super cool. Some of the neatest Batman stuff. The fact that Andy Muschietti is chosen to do the next Batman movie makes total sense to me. He handles Batman incredibly well. The action of The Flash doesn't work quite so well because I just don't think he had a good, firm handle on it. And I think it's partially because he had to work with what Zack Snyder had brought to it before, with the way Barry Goofy runs. He definitely runs a little more firmly in this, and not so silly, but it's still a little bit of silly energy is there, and it's kind of inescapable, unless you just commit to not having those other movies be part of your story. But this is designed as a continuation of either cut of Justice League. There's references to both cuts in the movie, so you kind of have to have seen both in order to really appreciate this. The best example of that is shortly after the opening action battle where Batman's a badass, and I want to talk about the Wonder Woman in 1 second, but I want to finish this point. He meets Iris West, and she's like, didn't I see you a couple years back? Referring to when he saved her in the Snyder Cut. And that scene only really plays in that moment. My wife turned to me during the movie because she hasn't seen the Snyder Cut, and she was like, have we seen her before? And I was like, kind of. Not in anything you would have seen. And then she was like, okay. So she was left a little confused. Rounding off the Flash Batman opening action scene, Wonder Woman comes in to save the day. We get the awesome theme music one possibly final time from our Wonder Woman. Gal Gadot comes in and is awesome. And then the film repeats an exact lifted joke from the Justice League of cut, the theatrical cut of Justice League, where she has her lasso touching both Batman and Barry, and then they start repeating their feelings about how attracted they are to her and all that stuff, which was something that was kind of heavily criticized of the Justice League post all the Joss Whedon controversies, which is weird because when the movie originally came out, people didn't really talk about that. In fact, most people I talked to thought that was one of the funniest moments in the movie. And it's lifted directly from his screenplay that was unproduced from, what was it, 2006 Wonder Woman? But yeah, they repeat that same joke, and that's something that you'll find in both the MCU and the DCEU, is the legacy of Joss Whedon's jokes just getting repeated, because he's a really good comedy writer. He's really funny, and rather than have other people write funny, or hiring writers that are actively good at writing comedy as well as like drama and action and all that stuff, they just tend to repeat his jokes. You got that with Loki being whipped around. There's multiple jokes within that first Avengers movie that still to this day are getting reused in the MCU movies. So that sort of tickled me. It works well, especially Barry's line with it, where he's like, sex is a thing I know about but haven't experienced. That whole thing, like, that was funny, but it was just like, we had this moment with Aquaman in Justice League. So anyway, moving on, Barry is confronted with the potential that his father is going to be permanently imprisoned, that he's going to lose his legal battle, and that is what sets Barry's arc in motion. He discovers that he can go back in time through the Speed Force if he runs fast enough and hard enough. And this is where the film becomes Flashpoint. It's Flashpoint light. It's never as successful as the Flashpoint comic book is. It's one of my favorite comic books. Had they done a direct adaptation of that, I think you would have had a much more interesting and firm movie. As is, it's pretty good. If you see a fly buzzing about, I apologize, and pretty soon you might see my cat go nuts and try to kill it. Anyway, back to the story. It does Flashpoint light. He discovers he can go back in time, and he wants nothing more than to re-engage with his mother, who was murdered as public thinking is by his father. However, Barry knows his father didn't do it. She was killed elsewhere, and he needs to prove it. And rather than go back and prove it, he just wants to live in a world where his mom is still there. And he has one final moment with Ben Affleck's Batman. And it's the best scene that Ben Affleck has shot for any of the DCEU movies. And I've liked his work before. I think in Batman vs. Superman, he was the absolute best element of it, and his scene where he's like talking about Superman, and if there's even 1% chance, we have to absolutely take it as an absolute or whatever. That whole scene is fantastic. He physically brought the physicality of Batman and whatnot. He's truly tremendous in Batman vs. Superman all the way through. He's okay in Justice League, but I really like the scene between him and Wonder Woman where he's talking about how Superman, this alien, was more human than Bruce ever has had a chance to be in his life. And you truly get the true alienation of Bruce Wayne and his recognition of that, and that of all beings, an alien is more human than he. I think that scene is tremendous. And all of those fail to reach the perfection of the scene where he's talking and just being the good guy, the mentor, the hero of Batman to Barry Allen, where they start talking about the scars of their past. And his final tome of, there's nothing wrong with you, Barry. There's nothing you need to fix. That scene is powerful. He's being a hero and helping even the smallest person, in the smallest way, the person in front of him. and it shows you how much his character has come along. And I love that scene, and Affleck kills it. He's perfect in that moment. It's my favorite it's my favorite non-payoff scene in the movie. We'll talk about my favorite scene shortly. But with that, Barry runs into the Speed Force, and jettisoned is the Snyderverse and everything that came before. And as a send-off to that, knowing that there still exists in some way, and my thought going into this was that Ben Affleck was going to die, and that's why he was going to have to run into the Speed Force, and he was going to meet the other Bruce Wayne and whatnot. Like, the fact that Affleck's still out there, and eventually, maybe one day we could get him back. It's doubtful. I think too many bridges were burned there for him to ever return to this role. But just knowing that he's there, and maybe we'll get more Wonder Woman, maybe we won't. It was kind of a lovely final bit. But then we move into Barry, where he meets the second Barry, the slightly younger Barry. And that scene I like. I like the scene where he's back with his mom and how important it is that he's with her and is connecting with her as an adult. And then he meets his younger self, and I'm not going to talk about the Ezra Miller of it all, but I will say this. They play both incarnations of these characters pretty perfectly. They are just annoying enough to be like that person that embody that personality that just kind of rubs you the wrong way, but still have like this deep likability that like gravity keeps going towards, where you want to root for them. And they do a good job with landing the humor and the drama. And so I liked their performance in this movie. Juxtaposing both performances, kind of being the same but also just slightly different, they did a good job. So that's the end of my Ezra Miller. My thoughts of their performance in this film bears no reflection to my thoughts of them as an individual outside of this, and I hope that they are truly seeking and allowing help to take hold of them. And Ezra. But moving on. The two Barrys discover that this is the moment that Barry gets his powers. So the other Barry, younger Barry, wants to get the power, and so Barry helps him to get the power in an effort to maybe go and fix things. And in doing so, Barry Prime loses his power. And this was kind of interesting and something that I did not expect to happen. All the previews kind of made it seem like both Barrys were powered up the whole time. So that was kind of a shock for me. But that scene is one of the early scenes in the film that establishes that this film has no idea how to establish what his power sets are. Now, I've read the comics, and I know he can phase through walls and stuff by moving between the atoms and things like that. But when he did that slightly earlier in the movie, my wife was like, he can walk through walls? What's that about? I thought he could just run fast. And then I explained what happens, and she's like, has he done that before? And I was like, not in the movies, and they did nothing to set that up. They set that up afterwards when the two Barrys meet. It's really unusual. But his power set is really weird because he gets zapped and then immediately heals. So that later on in the movie, when he's shot in the knee, my wife was just like, shouldn't he be healing from that? And I was like, you'd think. And then she's like, does he have super healing? And I was like, I kind of not really. That's just something more that this movie showed. But since they already showed it, it's weird that they're not showing it again. But then later on, when he is injured, he does heal fast. So, like, it's super weird. This movie does a terrible job at setting up Flash's skill set and powers. But moving on, now the two have to figure out how to get Barry Prime his powers back, and that's when Zod invades. And so Flash wants to find Clark to take on Zod and maybe help the people that he missed before. Echoing the save one. The one time he tried to save one, he saved one but failed the others. So that it makes sense why he would be scared to do that in Justice League, the theatrical cut. So like that stuff kind of really worked for me. Then they go and discover that Aquaman doesn't exist in this universe. Cyborg hasn't been created yet. And Calle is nowhere to be seen. So the only one they have left to go to, oh, and they have no idea where Diana Prince is. The only one they have left to go to is Batman. And when they go, you realize that you are in Tim Burton's Batman world. Now, this is something that I found kind of unique and interesting, in that the biggest movie you could compare this movie to is Spider-Man No Way Home. But in Spider-Man No Way Home, the use of Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, and especially Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, acts as a sequel to their previous work. Their character development continues. It feels like the natural next step for both of those characters. Not only that, it also feels like a natural next step redemption arc for Green Goblin, for Electro, for the continued storyline of Sandman and Doc Ock, and to a much lesser extent, the Lizard. So it felt like a continuity, continuing story for all of those characters, which made the whole movie matter. And it acted as a Spider-Man 4, a Amazing Spider-Man 3, and a Spider-Man Home 3 as well. So it really worked on all those levels. Discovering we are in Tim Burton's Batman world, and this felt weird because it's unequivocally definitely the same world. You have the Joker bag with the laughing thing. So it ties it directly to the first Tim Burton. The iconography of the building looks like the Burton one. The interior sets, the statues, it looks like that. So they're establishing that this is the same Batman. Right down to having Michael Keaton, the same suits, all that stuff. But nothing about the movie feels like a Batman 3. But weirdly enough, nothing with the Tim Burton world feels like it's in support of the main thesis of the film, of the scars that we have may always, they've shaped who we are and always establish who we are meant to be. That's kind of the main thesis of the movie, and let the past go. But everything in this, it doesn't support the Barry Allen of it all. Whereas in Spider-Man, you've had Peter Parker relying on the Avengers, relying on Nick Fury, relying on Iron Man to be the hero support system that he needs. It was a true origin story in that Spider-Man learned to rely on himself, and they told you that visually by having Peter Parker rely on Peter Parker and Peter Parker. It was always Peter that fashions who Spider-Man is and who Spider-Man was destined to be. And you don't get that in this film. You do very softly towards the end, where the three Flashes kind of come together and Barry makes the choice, but nothing that happens with Michael Keaton's Batman or Supergirl really supports that journey. And that's my biggest issue with this multiverse, and why I think of the multiversal event films, from No Way Home, Multiverse of Madness, Everything Everywhere All at Once, the two Spider-Verse films, I think this is easily the weakest of the bunch. Because all of those had elements that really worked to define who they were, and this one is the only one that feels like an outlier. You could kind of make that argument for Multiverse of Madness to some extent, but check back my spoiler review on that one and you can hear why I think that that movie does matter. So anyway, I'm also curious, the Burton of it all, I think, is weird, because everybody's praising Michael Keaton, as they should. He's a scene stealer. He's so compelling throughout the entire film. But I'd have to imagine, if I had an incredible reverence for the Tim Burton Batman movies, that I would be really disappointed to learn that at the end of the movie, that world was always destined for doomsday with the Zod machine or whatever. Like, that's an incredibly nihilistic take on that incarnation of Batman that you love and behold. Like, that's why people are so heavily marketing this film as Michael Keaton is back. And it's like, yeah, he's back to have his world destroyed and him die in it with no opportunity of survival. And it's just a grim conclusion. And it doesn't offer like a natural next step. It just feels like it's contrived but mean-spirited contrivance. And I wasn't wholly on board with that element of it. Had he joined the team and they went to another world that was destined to die and always die in it, and he kept dying, I would have been fine with that. It's not the fact that he dies, it's just the fact that this world that you've put so much reverence in for 2 Tim Burton movies, and they establish that this is a continuing story from those 2, it just seems so mean-spirited that this is the end of it. And it ends so grimly, and it ends at daytime, which is so opposite of everything. Another issue I have with both this and No Way Home, in all honesty, is that they don't capture any like, they use the iconography of their respective superheroes, but they don't use the visual storytelling style of the filmmakers who told those. There isn't any Sam Raimi elements or Mark Webb elements visually in No Way Home, just as this film doesn't really have any Tim Burton elements. In fact, Batman is used as an action hero, and his action stuff is phenomenal. That said, Tim Burton's Batman is not an action hero. There's very little action in those movies. I just rewatched Batman '89. I can attest that the action in that movie is, that you remember from that movie, is music doing a whole lot of heavy lifting. Because the action is pretty poorly shot. That said, it pulls you back even further from recognizing the fact that as a Batman 3, this is the end of the Batman road. And his final scene, his death scene in the final battle is sweet, and it worked for me with his ultimate death, not with the first death. There's no way I believed that was going to be his finale. His ultimate death worked for me a little better. However, I think they could have done another pass at that to make it resonate a little bit more. But moving back a little bit, I jumped ahead. We then have Batman join the team, and they decide to go rescue Clark, only to get there, and it's not Clark. It's Kara Zor-El. And I was fine with that. And they perfectly captured that part of Flashpoint, finding the emaciated body of Calle, this time Kara. But they captured that perfectly from the book. That's, I think, the thing they captured the best from Flashpoint. And as Kara gets her power, I think everything... She's a scene stealer. Sasha Calle, or Kay, I'm not sure how you pronounce her last name, but she is great, and I would love to see more Supergirl. And I love her visually. Her costume, her haircut looks cool. The way she plays very much as a Snyder version of what Supergirl would be, to keep the continuity in line there, it really worked for me. Everything about her, I thought her scenes were quite strong. She doesn't have a ton to do outside of be angry, mean, and like hit things. Very stern, but they gave character motivation to make that understandable and recognizable, while also having an actress that pulled it off completely believably. She, for me, also stole the show just as much as the two Batmen. And therein lies the problem. I want to continue talking about Supergirl one more time, but you have a great Barry Allen story about Barry Allen, and, spoiler alert, an evil Barry Allen that is Barry Allen 2, just in a much further along stage. So you have the three Barry Allens, and you could have told that story without as much Batman as we got, or as much Supergirl as we got. They become distractions because your focus goes so towards Supergirl and the Batman that it's hard not to recognize that it feels like they put them in here because they had no confidence in Barry Allen's story being something that would resonate. Now, that becomes a blessing and a curse. I said I wouldn't talk about it, but Ezra Miller's controversies came along, so they have an excellent pivot point with which they can direct all the attention. Like, yeah, this is the Flash, but it's really Batman. Look at all the Batmen. And then it's also with Supergirl. Hey, Supergirl, cool. So you can quietly, like, push Ezra to the side. However, this is this is Barry's story. Barry is the emotional through line. Barry is the strength of this story, and everything that resonates. Like, I'm fine with having all the scenes early on with Ben Affleck's Batman, or even bringing in Michael Keaton's Batman and stuff like that. But to have them steal the show so strongly does a disservice, and it shows a lack of confidence in in a Flash movie. This is a glorified Batman movie, especially the way it's marketed. And that's kind of disappointing. If you go back to Spider-Man Homecoming, where they pitched it repeatedly as Spider-Man and Iron Man teaming up, Robert Downey Jr. and Iron Man are in 8 minutes of that 2-hour and 15-minute movie. He's there. He's got a commanding presence when he's on screen, Iron Man. But it is unequivocally a Spider-Man movie. The commanding presence of this film is the superheroes that surround Barry, and Barry coming into his own at the end by recognizing that Batman was right. There was nothing to fix there. Pardon me. So, I think that's a big disservice to this movie and to the character of Barry Allen. The Flash, in some incarnation, has been around since the 1940s. And for a studio to think that this character cannot sustain a feature film without the support and strength of other characters to surround him and elevate him shows just how little this company truly understands these characters. And it's good that we are in a time of change. And I hope that James Gunn understands these characters a little better than the governing forces behind these movies did before. And I still, even though I've seen the movie, I don't feel like we've gotten the Flash movie we deserve. And I don't think that there has been a Flash story that's been as well told as key episodes of Season 1 of The Flash. If you cut together about 6 of those episodes into one, like, mini-series event, a 6-part story, a 6-hour movie or whatever, that is a perfect, beautiful story that has emotional resonance and hits a lot of the same beats as this film. You could probably even truncate that down to 3 episodes and still tell the same story in an emotionally resonant way. And this film tries to do that, but then distracts you with all the Batman, and it hurts this film as much as I love it. And that's why I'm saying, I think people are going to love this movie. Because who doesn't love Batman? And these are some of the best incarnations of Batman, both as these characters, but as actors in these roles. And it's just a shame for the Flash of it all. I said I wanted to talk a little bit more about Supergirl, so I'll do that in 1 second. Flash gets his powers back in a Frankenstein kind of scene that is interesting, but probably could have been shortened by quite a lot. This movie is overlong and feels its length. But moving on to the Supergirl thing I want to talk about, and the inevitability of this world being one that is destined to die. It's the no-win scenario that the two Barrys have to learn. Zod comes in without Kal-El to stop him. Kal-El was killed as a baby, which seems pretty cruel as a fan, but I get it, it's an alternate universe. That motivates Supergirl, and Supergirl just completely gets trounced. There's no moment wherein you think she is going to beat Zod, and that's just a problem that I have with a lot of comic books prior to, I'd say, the 2010s, is the female characters are written as either being hyper strong but then ultimately incapable of defending themselves or surviving, or they're written really meekly and are kind of pathetic characters. They tend to fridge the characters, even the super women. Be it Supergirl, and yeah, I know she dies in Crisis on Infinite Earths, that's part of her canon, and whatnot, but she doesn't go out the same way here. The Jean Grey of it all, there's any number of females that you could bring up here. So much so that I'm having trouble even articulating how many are flooding to mind. Spider-Woman comes to mind as well, suddenly. You had a tendency to just kill these characters blithely, and this movie repeatedly does so for Supergirl. The new interesting character that you've just introduced that has become kind of a fan favorite, at least on my end. I don't know what other people in the public have to say about it, but that just really irked me. And showing that she always dies, she always has to die in this universe, is something that really bothered the hell out of me. I didn't like it. It's mean-spirited, and it does a disservice to this fantastic character that has also 70 years of gravitas to her, shunted down to a spiky glove from Zod. I didn't like it. And the great blowout battle between the Man of Steel and Zod in Man of Steel, you see no inkling that she has the capacity to do the same. And that comes down to poor writing, in my opinion. But alas, this isn't her story, and this is also the problem, is I'm so fixated on these other characters because I like them so much and they have so much to offer, but this is Barry's story. So moving back to Barry's story, they try to repeatedly save everything, but that's when Barry Prime remembers what both Batman said about the scars and about letting go, and recognizing that this world is always destined to be doomed. And you see the young Barry repeatedly trying to save the day, and as he's taking more damage as he tries and fails at fixing the day. So much so that it spawns the evil one that we've seen glimpses of repeatedly throughout the movie, only to discover that he is the young Barry, having tried so often, so many years and years off of his life to try and fix this one scenario, and he is incapable of doing it. And that concept kind of works, but I don't think it lands wholly well for me, and I can't necessarily articulate why. I feel like it was the wrong Barry learning the lesson. I feel like if that had been the prime Barry trying repeatedly, and the second one understanding that, no, wait, you have to go back, and whatnot. I think that may have worked a little better because you could have juxtaposed the Barry Prime, who ultimately has to learn that truth, with the one that can't give it up, who is in fact him and not the other one. I don't know. It's convoluted mess. But as the three confront each other, they're seeing all around them these worlds collide, and this is the big moment where all the cameos come in. You see an earlier incarnation of Flash. You see it starts with a beautiful shot of the George Reeves Superman, which I loved. I love that Superman. He's super underrated, and if this is the people's first introduction of that character, I hope they go back and watch Superman in the Moment, and the TV show for that matter. You got Adam West's Batman, which was fantastic to see on the big screen, and then I genuinely got emotional seeing Christopher Reeve and Helen Slater coming back with the swell of the John Williams music as Superman and Supergirl. It was touching. You got Kevin Smith's, if you've never heard Kevin Smith talk about his time working on his version of Superman Lives, stop this video now and listen to it. He has a fantastic story of his unproduced screenplay that was supposed to be Superman 5, where a producer forced him to have Superman, who was supposed to be played by Nicolas Cage, have a battle with a spider, which he called the Thagarian Snare Beast, and to finally see Nicolas Cage as Superman fight a giant spider in the third act of the movie made me so happy. I was geeking out. And all of this comes together as the worlds are literally colliding and getting destroyed, and seeing them getting destroyed is just as mean-spirited as seeing the destruction of the Tim Burton Batman world, where it's like, all right, there's reference here, but then not a whole lot of reference because we're gonna fuck it up and destroy the worlds. But I digress. The fan service there is spectacular. Is it earned? That's kind of questionable. I eke on the side of maybe not so much. It could have been done better. I think if you'd actually physically gone into those worlds, it might have worked stronger. But just seeing glimpses of them, it worked enough. But it didn't necessarily earn its keep. That said, it was cool to see all that. Barry discovers the truth. The two Barrys, the young Barry and his older young self, eliminate each other, and Barry runs Back to the Future, which was a running gag throughout the movie, where he goes back to the moment where, the running gag was Back to the Future. In this universe, Eric Stoltz played it. They should have played the clip of Eric Stoltz in the movie just to really sell the point, because the look online, you can see Eric Stoltz as Marty McFly. But anyway, Barry goes back to the moment that he tried to fix everything and actually fixes the mistake, sort of. And that's where the most beautiful scene of the film is. As much as I loved seeing Christopher Reeve and Helen Slater back and all the other characters that I previously mentioned, as much as I loved the Ben Affleck scene, having Michael Keaton back, all the Supergirl stuff, nothing resonates as strong as the genuine through line of the movie, which is Barry needing to let go and talk to his mother. Now, as a person who lost his mother, that scene was incredibly touching, because I too never got a chance to tell my mom how much I appreciate her. I mean, I did on some level from time to time, but not in any genuine of a way. And once you have experienced that loss, you so badly want to go back to those moments where you could have said everything you needed to and just never did. And he gets that moment, and I was rolling tears. It was beautiful, absolutely powerful moment. And he's fixed everything, and he's ready to go back, but then he has one last idea to vindicate his father, so he switches things up. He goes back in time, vindicates his father, and at the moment that all that played out, I was like, he fucked up time again. This can't be right. So then when Flash goes outside and is ready to face his day, and he gets a call from Batman once more. We get the final cameo of the movie, and it's not Ben Affleck, it's George Clooney, suggesting, are we now in Batman and Robin universe? I wouldn't mind seeing another George Clooney take at the job. I don't think George Clooney's a bad Batman. He made a bad Batman in that movie, maybe, but he's not a bad choice. He's an insanely gifted actor, and he brings hardcore intensity. If you've never seen From Dusk Till Dawn, watch that movie and tell me that he doesn't exude Batman energy there. But I digress. Seeing George Clooney come back and realizing we're in the Schumacher-verse, again, has a bit of hollowness to it because none of the iconography around recognizes it as anything Schumacher-y at all. They should have, once it was established that it was Clooney, you should have had him looking around and seeing, like, maybe the 90s electro-punk, like, lighting and all that kind of stuff, the glow lights. That would have been kind of neat. But then it shunts you right into the credits. The credits, earlier in the movie you'd seen a falling dog, but you never saw how Flash saves him. You get the story of how Flash saves him, and then one final scene where Flash meets Aquaman, and you are teased with the fact that Jason Momoa, for whatever reason, is always Aquaman. He's a constant, which, of all the characters to be a constant, it seems weird to be him. Sure, he's like one of the most charismatic actors in the DCEU, but he isn't necessarily the embodiment of Aquaman in all of his forms for me. That seemed weird. That just seemed to be thrown in there to make it less weird when we see Aquaman, the Last Kingdom, at the end of the year. Or the Lost Kingdom? Whatever the hell it's called. Anyway, there's a lot of criticisms going on throughout this video, and I think those criticisms are incredibly valid. I could probably complain about this movie for the rest of my life. Is this the Flashpoint movie we deserved? No, it's not as emotionally resonant as actual Flashpoint. If we had actually gotten the Flashpoint where Flash accidentally went back in time and discovered a world where his mom existed and he wants to hold on to that, but everything else around him is corrupt and destroyed, and having a background battle between Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman and the Atlanteans led by Aquaman, having that as just like a background story. You could use them in the same amount of time that they were used in this film. Having like Cyborg, which he wasn't in this for reasons, I'll let you discover that for yourself, but he wasn't in this film, but you could have utilized him in some way had they been able to make peace with Ray Fisher, who's very good in that role, I will say. But then having the Batman be Thomas Wayne rather than Bruce Wayne, and wanting that character to know that his son is living in some world, it doesn't have to be his own world, that would have worked very emotionally well. You have the two Flashes, Yvonne Thawne, or whatever his name was, as the Reverse Flash, who's tampering with everything, and then the Clark Kent. You could have told the story even without Clark and have it still be Supergirl. You could have basically told that exact same story on some level, and it would have really profoundly worked, and not been an intrusive story on the Barry Allen of it all. He is the through line, and he wants to fix everything while also trying to be there with his mother. And you didn't get the amazing Run Barry moment at the end of that story. If you're going to adapt Flashpoint, you got to adapt Run Barry. It is the most powerful part of that story, adapted incredibly well in the last episode of the first season of The Flash. So, yeah, we'll have that moment on celluloid, but we don't have it in major celluloid. Not that this movie looks particularly any better than anything you would have seen on the CW. This movie's digital effects are getting dinged quite a bit. The director says it's intentional. I don't know if it is. It has very much a look of The Matrix Reloaded or Revolutions, where everybody looks just a little too rubbery. But as I said in my non-spoiler review, I'm not here to criticize visual effects. I can't animate worth shit, so why should I be criticizing somebody who Again, I do know story. I do come from a writing background, so I do feel comfortable discussing flaws within narrative, of which this film has many. This film has several screenwriters attached to it, and it feels like an amalgamation of ideas that didn't have one singular vision. And if somebody had just gone through and done one more pass at this, I think you could have made this a firmer and stronger film. As is, it works, but kind of only just. This film's going to have its people who absolutely love it, and I get it. If you love fan service, you're gonna love this movie. There is a lot of it. If you love Michael Keaton's Batman, just seeing him back on the big screen again, it's gonna work for you. If you love Batman or Batfleck, you're gonna dig it. There's a lot to like here, but for everything there is to like, there's kind of something to not like. So if people absolutely hate this and see this as an affront to the Snyderverse or a bastardization of Tim Burton, of what Tim Burton did with his movies, having like turning those movies into mind-numbing action, I can see how you're gonna be disappointed. I wasn't. I kind of ride the middle. I liked it. It's definitely a movie that is better than okay. That I liked, with strong performances from all involved, that may not always capitalize on its tone, but it's a tone that, as I said before, I kind of dig. Flash is a comic book that tends to lean a little more comedic at times, and so having a film that does so as well, while also having emotionally resonant moments, works for me. I like it. Let me know what you thought about the film in the comments down below. I've kind of exhausted my thoughts on Flash. Drop down in the comments what you thought of this film, what worked for you, what didn't work for you. Did this movie Last Jedi you? And by that, do you love Last Jedi or do you hate Last Jedi? I love Last Jedi, it's my favorite. Did this movie Last Jedi you? Let me know in the comments down below. Thanks for watching. Check out my non-spoiler video if you want my more base level thoughts. This includes all of my thoughts. Also check out Wandering Witch Publishing in the links down below. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, do all that good stuff. Peace.